My world didn't just stop, it fractured into a million pieces with a single text message, and it wasn't the one I was dreading from a doctor, it was from my mother. In that one moment, I learned that for the last 8 years, I hadn't been a daughter, I had been a utility, a private, no limit line of credit they used to build a shrine for my brother. The phone call that detonated my life came on a crisp autumn afternoon. I was in my office on the 30th floor of a shimmering skyscraper in San Francisco's financial district, deep in the orderly, logical world of intellectual property law. I was a person who built arguments on precedent and fact, a woman who prided herself on being in control. The school nurse's strained voice was a sledgehammer to that facade. Words I only knew from legal depositions, words like unresponsive and seizure, were suddenly real, aimed directly at my 7-year-old daughter. The intricate architecture of my life collapsed into one single, desperate imperative: get to Maya. I have no coherent memory of the drive to the UCSF Medical Center. I just remember the visceral sensation of my fingernails digging into the leather of the steering wheel and the familiar beauty of the Bay Bridge transforming into a hostile cage of brake lights and angry horns. Every stalled car was a personal enemy, every red light a deliberate act of cruelty keeping me from my child. I ran into the emergency department, a place that smells of industrial cleaner and fear. The air was a low symphony of beeping monitors, hushed, urgent voices, and the quiet sounds of human suffering. A nurse, whose face was a roadmap of exhaustion, led me through the organized chaos. We passed a terrified couple huddled together, an elderly woman moaning softly on a gurney, and finally arrived at a small bay, sectioned off by a thin, pale green curtain. And there she was, my Maya, my daughter, who was a force of nature, a whirlwind of paint-splattered jeans and endless questions, was terrifyingly still. She seemed to have shrunk, a tiny, fragile figure lost in the vast white landscape of the hospital bed. A spiderweb of wires and tubes connected her small body to a tower of machines, each one blinking and beeping out a fragile rhythm. That steady electronic pulse became the only thing in the universe that mattered. Seeing her so vulnerable, so utterly dependent on those machines, felt like a physical blow. A tidal wave of helplessness washed over me, so powerful I had to brace myself against the wall to keep from collapsing. My husband, Mark, was frantically making his way from his software engineering job in Silicon Valley, but in that initial blinding flash of terror, I did what I had always been conditioned to do. I reached for my family. My parents. They lived in a quiet, manicured suburb in Palo Alto, a 40-minute drive without traffic. They were, or so I believed, the quintessential grandparents, the ones who kept a special cookie jar for Maya and whose hugs could solve any problem. My hands shook so violently I could barely unlock my phone. I sent a message to the family group chat to my mom, my dad, and my older brother Daniel. Maya had a seizure at UCSF emergency. She is unconscious. Please come. It was not a request. It was a plea, a summons from the deepest part of my soul. I needed my mother. I stared at the large clock on the wall, each tick of the second hand an eternity. Mark arrived, his face a grim mask of controlled panic, and we held onto each other, creating a tiny, desperate island in the sea of medical emergency. We spoke to Maya in low whispers, telling her we were there, that we loved her, that she was safe, and then my phone buzzed. My mother. A wave of relief so potent it made my knees weak flooded through me. I swiped open the message. Her words were like swallowing shards of glass. "Oh, sweetie, that sounds awful. We're in the middle of a huge thing for Daniel right now. He's in a real jam and needs our full support. Sending prayers for little Maya." I reread the text, the words blurring together. A jam? For Daniel? My 32-year-old brother, a man who floated through life on a cloud of charisma and our parents' unending financial support, whose job title was a nebulous and ever-shifting lifestyle consultant. His jams were the stuff of family legend for their sheer triviality: a flight cancellation, a dispute with a landlord over a security deposit, a broken espresso machine. What conceivable emergency could he be having that would eclipse his niece lying unresponsive in a hospital bed? The sheer breathtaking selfishness of it hollowed me out. The anger hadn't formed yet. It was just a cold, strange numbness. I put the phone down, gripped Mark's hand, and focused all my being on the gentle rise and fall of my daughter's chest. The hours stretched and bled into one another. Doctors and specialists spoke in hushed clinical tones, dropping terrifying phrases like neurological event and immediate MRI. Then, my phone lit up again. My mother. For one naive, hopeful second, my heart leaped. Maybe they'd handled Daniel's jam. Maybe they were on their way. I opened the message. It was a photograph. There was Daniel, standing in the middle of a stunning brand new kitchen with gleaming quartz countertops and a professional-grade stove. He was holding up a set of keys, a smug, victorious grin on his face. My parents stood on either side of him, their arms wrapped around his shoulders, beaming with a pride so fierce it was almost radiant. The caption below it read, "Our boy is officially a homeowner. So proud." The mortgage process was such a nightmare for him, poor dear. A white-hot rage so pure and blinding it made the edges of my vision swim, surge through me. I couldn't speak. I simply handed the phone to Mark. I watched his face morph from confusion to stunned disbelief, and then to a cold, protective fury I had never seen in him. "Poor dear," he whispered, his voice laced with acid. "Our daughter is in a pediatric intensive care unit, and they're worried because Daniel was stressed out by paperwork for his new luxury condo." That was the moment the dam broke. This wasn't a simple mistake or a lapse in judgment. This was a public declaration. It was a brightly lit billboard announcing their priorities, a formal statement of where their love, their concern, and their loyalty truly lay, and it was not with me or with my child. The final, fatal strike against our relationship came the following morning. Maya was awake, groggy and confused, but she was stable. The doctors were admitting her for a full workup of tests. The fear was still a cold, heavy stone in my stomach, but I decided to make one final attempt at connection. I would call my mother. I would be the adult. I would give her an update, one last chance to behave like a grandmother. She answered with a breezy, cheerful tone. "Morning, sunshine. Any news?" The jarring disconnect between her chipper voice and my terrifying reality was nauseating. I took a steadying breath. In a calm, measured voice, I told her everything. I told her Maya was being admitted, that they were looking for the cause of the seizure, that we were terrified. Her response is a sound I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She let out a soft, airy little laugh, a dismissive puff of air. "Oh, Olivia, you do have a tendency to catastrophize," she said, her voice full of a cloying, patronizing sweetness. "Kids get these little things. I'm sure it's nothing serious. She'll be back to her old self in no time. You were always such a worrier." She laughed at the possibility that her granddaughter had a serious neurological condition. The sound was like a physical slap across my face, and in that moment, something fundamental inside of me, a bond forged over 35 years of being a daughter, just severed. There was no explosion, no dramatic crack, just a clean, silent break, leaving behind a cold, desolate emptiness where my devotion used to be. "I have to go," I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of any emotion. I ended the call before she could offer another one of her infuriatingly hollow platitudes. My hands were steady now. The fear had been replaced by the chilling, diamond-hard clarity of the truth. Now, here is the part of the story that casts all of this in its true grotesque light. 8 years ago, my father's successful landscaping business collapsed after a series of bad investments. They were on the verge of losing their home in Palo Alto with no savings, no retirement, and a staggering amount of debt. I had just made partner at my law firm, finally earning a significant income. I did what I thought any good daughter would do. I stepped in. Quietly, without fanfare, I became the silent, invisible engine that powered their lives. I took over their $3,000 mortgage payment. I paid the lease on their Lexus. When their credit cards were maxed out, I didn't just pay them off. I became a co-signer on a new one and set up an automatic payment from my own account to cover whatever they spent. It averaged nearly $5,000 a month, every single month, for 8 straight years. I did it because I believe that is what family does. You support each other, you don't keep score. But as I stood in that sterile hospital corridor, my mother's dismissive laugh echoing in my mind, the horrifying calculus of the situation became brutally clear. That night, after Mark and Maya were both finally asleep in her hospital room, I drove back to our quiet house. I sat down in my home office, the only illumination coming from the soft glow of my laptop screen. My mind was preternaturally calm, my purpose absolute. I logged into my bank account. And there it was, the symbol of my long-running delusion, the scheduled monthly transfer for their mortgage. With one deliberate, decisive click, I deleted the entire series. Next, the car insurance and the lease payment. Click. Gone. I logged into the credit card portal, navigated to the account settings, found my name listed as the responsible party, and clicked Remove myself from this account. A pop-up asked for confirmation. Are you sure you wish to revoke your financial responsibility? I clicked yes. It was a quiet, digital amputation of a relationship that was already dead. I felt no rage, no satisfaction, just a vast, empty, and profoundly liberating sense of peace. I sent no warning. I made no call. I just turned off the flow of money. The silence from their end was absolute. It lasted for 4 days. 4 days of MRIs and EEGs and holding my breath. 4 days of watching my incredible, resilient daughter slowly come back to life. Then, on the 5th day, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, my father called. I answered. His voice was a frantic, panicked squeak of confusion and indignation. Olivia, what is going on? Your mother's card was just declined at Whole Foods, and we got a notice from the bank saying our mortgage is in default. Did you forget to make the transfers this month? I let him rant, his words a waterfall of pure entitlement. When he finally gasped for breath, my own voice emerged, as cold and clear as a winter morning. I didn't forget anything, Dad. I have stopped paying your bills, all of them. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end. What? What are you talking about? Why would you do that? We need that money. You can't just stop. You made your choice last week, I said, my words like sharpened steel. You chose to help Daniel with his condo instead of coming to the hospital for your granddaughter. Mom laughed when I told her how scared we were. My financial support is for my family, and you have made it abundantly clear that you are no longer part of it. The phone was wrenched from his hand. It was my mother now sobbing hysterically. She shrieked that I was cruel, that I was punishing them, that I was heartless. She cried about how much pressure Daniel was under, how he was their son, how he needed them. Good, I said, the single word, a shard of ice. Then you can ask Daniel to help you. The son you poured all your resources into can be your new support system. The First National Bank of Daniel is officially open for business. I'm sure he'll be happy to take over your mortgage. I hung up while she was still sputtering in disbelief. I waited for a wave of guilt to wash over me, but it never came. My entire world had contracted to the 4 walls of Maya's hospital room. But there was one final, sickening chapter. About 2 weeks later, my cousin Sarah called me. She sounded hesitant. Olivia, look, I know this is none of my business, she began, but I heard their version of things, and I know it's not the truth. There's something you need to know about Daniel's housewarming. I steeled myself. Sarah explained that on the day Maya was in the emergency room, my parents weren't just helping Daniel unpack boxes. They were at a title company, co-signing his loan and presenting him with a cashier's check for $80,000 for the down payment on his new condo in Soma. For months, he had been whining about the San Francisco property market, so my parents, determined to give their golden boy the lifestyle they believed he was owed, had leveraged their own finances to the absolute limit to make his dream come true. The final, nauseating piece of the puzzle clicked into place. My 8 years of financial support hadn't been for their day-to-day survival. It was the foundation that allowed them to build a monument to my brother. I paid for their house, their car, their food, and their bills, which freed up every single dollar of their own income and every available point of their credit to lavish upon him. I had asked for nothing for 8 years, and in the one moment of my life I truly needed them, they were too busy handing my brother a life that I had unknowingly paid for. But Sarah wasn't finished. She told me my parents and Daniel were now spinning a new narrative to the rest of the family. In their version, Maya had merely had a little dizzy spell from dehydration. I was the unstable, hysterical one, an overreacting mother who was using a minor health scare as a vicious excuse to financially abandon my loving elderly parents. They weren't just abandoning me, they were actively trying to destroy my reputation to salvage their own. A few nights later, our doorbell rang. It was my father standing alone on our doorstep. He looked smaller, 10 years older than he had a month ago. He looked utterly defeated. A tiny flicker of pity sparked in my chest, but it was immediately extinguished by a cold clinical curiosity. I led him into the entryway. He stood there, wringing his hands, his eyes fixed on our hardwood floors. He mumbled about how they'd made a terrible mistake, how much they missed Maya. "Daniel just relies on us so much," he said, his voice weak. "You were always so capable, Olivia. You and Mark, you never seemed to need anything from us." And then he delivered the line that I will carry with me forever. We figured you had it under control at the hospital. We didn't want to get in your way." The pathetic cowardice of that excuse was a deeper insult than any lie. "In the way?" I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "You weren't in the way, you were absent. There is a universe of difference between those two things. You weren't thinking about us at all. You were thinking about him. You were always only thinking about him." "Are you really going to keep your daughter from her grandparents over one mistake?" he asked, his voice cracking with self-pity. "I'm not keeping her from anyone," I said, finally meeting his gaze. "You made yourselves ghosts in her life at the precise moment she needed you most. I am simply no longer willing to pretend that I can see you." He left. Their attempts at contact since have been hollow and performative. A birthday card for Maya with a crisp $100 bill inside. A text on Christmas morning claiming they were thinking of our family. They are the empty gestures of people who don't miss the person. They miss the well from which they drew their water. I heard through Sarah that the property taxes and HOA fees in Soma were more than Daniel had anticipated. He's struggling. He has never once reached out to me. That silence is the only kindness he has ever offered. Mark and I have made our decision. We're moving. We're selling our house and buying a small farm in Oregon. We need a new beginning, a place to plant our roots in clean soil, a place where Maya can grow up surrounded only by people who prove their love with their presence, not with empty words and cash-filled envelopes. This entire nightmare taught me the most painful and most valuable lesson of my life. Family is not a title that entitles you to a person's heart or their labor or their money. Real family is a choice. It is a verb. It is in the showing up, in the holding on, in the shared terror, in a sterile hospital room in the middle of the night. For years, I bled myself dry for the hollow title of the good daughter. Now I save all my strength, all my love, and all my resources for my real family, my husband and my child. I chose my daughter, and I have never for a single second looked back.